everybody. Today I am here to talk about The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Now this is a classic that I have been curious about for quite some time. I have memories of watching one of the movie adaptations a long time ago when I was a kid. And I've been aware of this story for quite some time and kind of known what it's about. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, so again, I don't remember it all that well, but I've been wanting to read this for a while now, and I've also been in the mood to kind of read some classics lately, which you'll probably see more of when I do my monthly reading wrap-up. But yeah, thought I would sit down and read this book, and I'll just say right off the bat, this is officially the longest book I have ever read in my life. Get a load of the size of this book. Yes, this book is truly the definition of a doorstopper. This thing is an absolute behemoth of a book. This book clocks in at exactly 1,243 pages long. Now, there are many different editions of this book out there. And from what I understand, I could be wrong, but from what I understand, this is the most faithful adaptation or translation, I mean, of the book. This is originally a French novel written by Alexander Dumas in, I believe, 1844. From like 1844 to 1845, I think. I think this book was originally serialized when it was published. And it was written like between those years. And yeah, a lot of the different editions and translations of this book over time have been like heavily abridged and altered. And after reading this, I could see why. So I will say that I did really enjoy this book, but I do have some negatives with it as well. I'll get more into those a little bit once I give you guys a little bit of an idea of what this one's about. I'll tell you a little bit about the plot, just in case maybe you haven't heard about this or aren't too familiar with the story. So the central plot to this book, our main character we follow, his name is Edmond Dantes, or Dantes. I'm probably going to be mispronouncing a lot of these characters' names as they are French, and I'm just dumb. I'm not good at pronouncing foreign names, but but yeah, anyway, we follow our main character, Edmond Dantes. He is a young French sailor. I believe he's like 20, 21 years old, around there. He's very, very young. He just got back from a long voyage on the sea, delivering some goods, or just doing some work, whatever he does as a sailor. I forget the fine details. And when he gets back from his voyage, he discovers that his captain dies, and in his place, Edmund himself is made the new captain of the ship. And so Edmund, prior to this, was like very poor, just trying to work for a living. He's taking care of his father, who is very old and kind of sick and can't really fend for himself too well. So he's trying to provide for his father. He also has a young fiance that he plans on marrying, and he has to provide for her and earn more money to fund their marriage. And so he was really struggling. And after the captain dies, he is made captain of the ship and has plans to make a lot of money and is soon on his way to success. He's on the brink of like success and a lot of happiness. He has a lot of money coming his way. Things just seem to be going very well for this young sailor. And he's generally a pretty nice guy. He seems like a really good person. You feel some sympathy for him for some of these hardships that he faces with being poor at first and having to take care of his father, and all of his money just going towards his fiance and his father basically to provide for them. And you really like this character. Edmund is a pretty good guy for the most part. He's a very honest person. He's a very believable and well-written character. However, very early in the story, after we are introduced to this character in this scenario, and when he is about to be like on the brink of happiness and has all of this success coming in his way with him being made the new captain of the ship and all of this, there is a plot that is undertaken by a couple of his friends, his jealous friends, where they basically get him sent to prison falsely. Edmund is arrested under basically a made-up thing that these guys come up with. One of these characters is also on this ship, and I believe he was first mate and supposed to be made captain. But for whatever reason, he was not made captain when the captain died, and so he's very jealous of Edmund and very angered that this guy, I believe his name is Danglers or Donglers, again, I'm not sure how to pronounce these French names. So he's very jealous of Edmund. And then you have this other character in here named Fernand, who is close friends with Mercedes, who is Edmund's fiance. And Fernand has grown up and has been like a childhood friend of Mercedes. You know, they've been friends throughout their whole lives. And he is very interested and attracted to Mercedes and wants her for himself. And so he is also very jealous of Edmund and does not like Edmund at all and doesn't understand why he gets this girl that basically Fernand has known his whole life and been friends with. And so together, Fernand and Danglers, these two gentlemen basically come up with this plot to falsely send, to send Edmund to prison under false pretenses. And there are some other things involved. The plot is a bit more intricate and elaborate, quite a lot more elaborate than this brief description that I'm giving to it. But again, that's just kind of the basis of the story. That's kind of what it's about. And so during some dinner party, some big celebration that Edmund is having with his family and friends, basically the police invade this celebration. They haul him off. Edmund goes to see the crown prosecutor. And the crown prosecutor discovers what happens. He learns that Edmund is actually innocent and that there's no reason for him to be here right now in front of the judge. So the crown prosecutor at first tells Edmund that he's going to help him and let him go. And then he basically lies to him, and instead of letting him go, he sends him off to prison because part of this plot that was used to accuse Edmund of this certain deed that he really is not guilty of, the crown prosecutor's father is somehow tied to this plot. And if he were to convict Edmund of it and make it like public and take it to the courtroom and all of this, then the crown prosecutor's father would also become guilty. And the crown prosecutor, I believe his name is Villefort, however you pronounce it. If he were to do this, then basically Villefort is doing this not to protect his father, but to protect his own image, his own self. Because if his father's treachery and crimes are uncovered, then it will ruin Villefort's reputation, and he will probably be dethroned as a crown prosecutor and perhaps even imprisoned himself. So you have 3 different characters in this book. Actually, there's more than that, but those are like the primary ones. So you have 3 different characters that are responsible for sending Edmund to prison. So Edmund, thinking that he's free due to the crown prosecutor's kind words and him telling him that, oh, I understand that you're innocent, you know, you can go. The crown prosecutor tricks him, and instead he ends up being hauled off to prison that is on this giant island. It's like this big fortress on this small island out in the middle of the ocean, miles from civilization. Edmund is hauled off there, and he is imprisoned there for a very, very long time. I won't spoil the plot too much more than this, I guess. But basically, he's in prison there for a long time. The story obviously does not end there. He ends up meeting someone in prison who helps him out, and together they kind of find a way to escape. And then from there, Edmund proceeds to embark on a mission of revenge to bring justice to his foes, to his former friends that imprisoned him because they were jealous of him and wanted what he had. And yeah, that's the central plot, the central story to this book. And I guess I will now get into like my positives and negatives with this book. So the first 300 pages of this book, absolutely fantastic. I give the first 300 pages alone like 5 out of 5 stars. As soon as I started reading this, I was kind of in shock at how fast paced this book was for how long it is. I mean, again, this book is over 1,200 pages long. And immediately it gets into the action. It tells you immediately who Edmund is. There's not really a lot of time wasted like on detail or prose in this book. It's mostly character actions and dialogue and things like that. So I appreciated that this book kind of got right into the meat of things without wasting a lot of time on detail. So we learn who Edmund is. Within the first 50 pages, he is being betrayed by his friends and sent up to prison. And then it's pretty fast paced throughout the whole like first quarter or third of this book roughly. My attention was just glued to this book. I could not put it down. I had to keep reading to find out what was going to happen next. Even during his time in prison, it's not really dull. It's not monotonous where you're just reading about him spending day after day in prison. It was actually very engaging and compelling all throughout this. And then, of course, up to the part where he is planning his escape from prison and then does escape. And there are some other subplots and things going on in the story that I don't want to talk about too much to avoid spoilers in case this is something maybe you haven't read before and are curious about. However, after we get past like this first 300 pages where we are following Edmond Dantes, the story takes a huge shift, a big direction change, where we abandon the point of view of Edmond Dantes and we follow some new characters that are introduced in the story that are somehow tied to the previous characters in the story. So we now fast forward to many, many years after Edmund has been imprisoned and finally escapes, and we follow some characters that are perhaps related to like Danglars and Fernand and some of these other characters that were responsible for sending him to prison. And we view Edmond Dantes, who is now known as the Count of Monte Cristo, through the eyes and the perspective of these other characters. And basically what unfolds is a very gradual and elaborate plot of the Count of Monte Cristo planning his revenge and planning to bring to justice his foes that were responsible for his very long imprisonment and basically snatching his life away from him. And all of these various characters that we follow, and there's a lot of different characters, believe me, all of these various characters that we follow, they are unaware of who Edmund is, or the people that do know who he is, they think that he died in prison. They have no idea that this Count of Monte Cristo, they have no idea who this guy is. They just think this guy is some rich gentleman that has come into their lives and has become friends with them. They are completely unaware that, you know, he has some ulterior motives and some plots of his own to accomplish. So yeah, kind of getting into my negatives a little bit now. Once we get past those first 300 pages and we start following all of these other different characters, things slow down quite a bit. The story gets a little bit confusing at times because there are just so many characters and it's hard to keep up with them all, to be honest. There are so many subplots to this book, so many different things going on. And we're not following the Count of Monte Cristo or Edmond Dantes anymore, really. We are following all these other characters and how they view the Count of Monte Cristo, who's basically the new Edmond Dantes, 15 years or however long later after he's escaped from prison. He's now disguised as this character. And yeah, that's pretty much what takes place for the next several hundred pages in this book. All the way up until like the last 300 pages, until where we start to get to like the climax of the book, and then where the Count of Monte Cristo finally does get his revenge. And the way that he does get his revenge is not at all what you would expect. It's not simply him aiming to kill his enemies or anything like that. And he's also went through some spiritual experiences, having gone through prison and having made a certain friend in prison. And so he doesn't believe it would be right to simply kill. He doesn't believe in murdering people. I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but there's a lot of like religious stuff in this novel that I thought was very interesting. The Count of Monte Cristo believes that he was freed from prison by the grace of God, and that he is now embarking on this mission to do the will of God in order to like bring justice to these people in this situation that he was unfortunately thrown into. And he feels like he's kind of like a vessel, like carrying out God's will. It's a lot deeper and more elaborate than how I am explaining it, but I just thought that stuff was kind of interesting. I really enjoyed reading about that. I'm not particularly like a super religious person myself, but I do find that stuff very interesting. And yeah, that was just an aspect of the story that I really liked. There's some kind of deep and thought-provoking stuff in here. But anyway, as we get to like the last several hundred pages after the very slowly paced and at times boring middle several hundred pages. But yeah, when we get to the last few hundred pages, this book starts to get good once again. And the realization of some of these characters have when they figure out who the Count of Monte Cristo is in their last moments and during their sort of comeuppance, I guess you could say, of what they've done, and they realize who the Count of Monte Cristo is, their realization of it is just absolutely priceless. Some of the best scenes in this entire book were towards those final moments at the end when they finally get their comeuppance. The Count of Monte Cristo reveals to them that he is actually Edmond Dantes that was imprisoned, you know, over a decade ago. And yeah, it's awesome. It is epic. The last couple hundred pages of this book were also absolutely fantastic and worthy of 5 stars. And this book doesn't have some like happy-go-lucky ending where he reunites with his ex-fiancée Mercedes and they live happily ever after. It doesn't really work out quite like that. This book doesn't have exactly a happy ending. There is some resolution made between certain characters, but it doesn't have quite the happy ending that you would expect. Not everything works out because of all of the changes and things that happened over time. Things just won't ever be the same. And unfortunately, the Count of Monte Cristo has some things that he'll never be able to come back to. And yeah, there's kind of a lot that happens at the end. It's hard to talk about without spoiling it. I don't want to give anything away. But I do really like the way that this book ended. It ended on a very profound, kind of thought-provoking note that is sort of bittersweet. It's not exactly a happy ending, but it's not exactly a bad ending either. It's just kind of a bittersweet ending. It ended on like the perfect note, I think. So yeah, overall, the first 300 pages, absolutely fantastic. Following Edmond Dantes, I could not put this book down. The last, I don't know, couple hundred pages or so, the same way. Once everything starts to wrap up and we come to the conclusion of it all, absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, the middle, however long it is, 900 pages, man, it was a little bit of a chore to get through, I'm not going to lie. Now, I read this book over the course of 2 weeks. It took me exactly 2 weeks to read this book. And I will admit that I was powering through this most of the way because during this long middle portion of the book, there were times where I felt like if I were to put this book down, I would have for a while and like take a break and come back to it. I would have a hard time coming back to it, and I might possibly lose interest in it because, man, there was just a lot of really slow scenes. It wasn't like this throughout the whole middle. There were some interesting parts. It was just interesting enough to keep me reading it, but I feel like I really did have to kind of power through that middle portion. And this book, did it need to be as long as it is? I don't think so. I don't think this book needed to be quite 1,200 pages long. And I would almost be curious to read like an abridged version of it and just to see how they differ, see what was cut out. I'm sure probably too much, and if I were to read one of those, I'm sure I would probably complain about it not being as good and having cut out too much important plot points like from this original edition. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like this could have been trimmed down quite a bit. I think this book definitely is worthy of being like an epic sort of long novel, but I don't think quite as long. I think this 1,200 page book could have been trimmed down to like 800 or 900 pages and just cut out some of that fat, some of that dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue in this book. Very, very dialogue heavy. We spend just pages and pages of characters just talking. And I think some of that could have been trimmed down a little bit. If this book would have been leaner, a little bit leaner and more compelling throughout, some of that middle fat just sort of trimmed off the book, this might be going into like one of my all-time favorite books. But unfortunately, as it stands, I think I'm going to give this book like a 3.5, kind of a high, kind of like a 3.75 out of 5. Just because the good parts of this book were really, really good. Absolutely fantastic. I fell in love with the characters, the story of Edmond Dantes. There's just, yeah, a lot of great things about this book, but man, this is the longest book I've ever read in my life, and I don't think I'll ever read it again. So for that, I can't really give it anything higher than like a 3.75 out of 5. So yeah. Also, the movie that I mentioned. I believe I watched the 2002 movie adaptation of this many, many years ago. I vaguely remembered it, and I also rewatched that after reading this, just out of curiosity. And that 2002 movie adaptation has Jim Caviezel in it, who's an actor I really like, and then Guy Pearce. And I just rewatched that, and it was an okay movie. Not bad, not really all that great either, especially after having read this. Watching that movie is probably the most condensed adaptation I've ever seen in my life. It is almost like a completely different story than from what we get here. And that movie is pretty long too. It's like 2 hours and 10 minutes long. It's a pretty long movie. But still, it would take like, I don't even know, like a whole TV series with like 10 seasons with 45-minute episodes to put everything in this book into, to transfer it to the screen. So yeah. I think that's everything that I have to say about the Count of Monte Cristo. Again, like a 3.75 out of 5. I'm glad I read this book. I enjoyed it, but at times it was a bit of a chore to get through. It was very, very long. The longest book I've ever read. And I'm glad that I read it, but it's not a one I would read again. Would I recommend this? Yes, if you have the patience to get through longer books. If not, maybe try reading one of the abridged versions. I don't know what they're like exactly. Maybe I will try reading one of those in the future just to see how they compare. But yeah, that's my review for the Count of Monte Cristo. If you guys have read this book or if you have any thoughts on this story, let me know down in the comments below. That's all I have for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.